Well, hi, welcome back to Everybody Loves Politics. I'm your host, Tom Bullington, and today on the show we have Shannon Watson, who is the founder of Definitely Someday, a firm that looks into the past and the future of prospective candidates for political office. Shannon, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell me a little bit about your firm.
Okay, so what we do is what I call pre-campaign management. We don't actually help people campaign, but we help get them ready to campaign. And by that, we look through and make sure that they are ready to be a candidate. A lot of groups and organizations, the parties, can teach someone how to be a candidate. They can teach them how to door knock and how to fundraise, election law. But candidates who come in more prepared to be a candidate are generally more successful. So what we do is we make sure that they have the leadership opportunities, that their social media is cleaned up and presents them in a favorable light, and mainly that their family is also ready.
Right.
That's one good way to derail a campaign. If you have a spouse who is not on board, then you really shouldn't be on board yet.
Okay. Now, does this come up very often where you have a family that says, hey, mom or dad, I don't want you to run for office?
It does happen sometimes. Our political culture has become so polarized and so negative that a lot of people don't see running for public office as an honorable thing anymore. And I believe that's absolutely not true. I think there are a lot of people who would be fantastic public servants who absolutely should be in office. That's how I pick the candidates that I work for, is I find the person who should win, not necessarily the person who will win. And the only thing worse than losing is losing badly when you don't have to.
Right.
So we work on those things.
Okay. So, in the process of going through this, you mentioned social media. So hypothetically, if someone were to be running for an office, a year in advance or so, you're looking at back to their social media posts of what maybe a opponent might be looking at as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We generally work with candidates who are wanting to run for office in 2 to 10 years. So we work with them way before anybody else would be looking at their social media platforms. So we can generally clean up anything, get things deleted. Digital is forever, but if you can get ahead of those things, make sure that there isn't anything unsavory out there. Get that deleted out. We generally don't find a lot of things.
Right.
Most people who have a pull to run for office are generally pretty careful about their social media anyway.
Right, right. So, for example, someone who has, 27,000 Twitter posts, tweets out there.
It takes a while.
But that would take a while if
It
someone
does.
were to.
It does. And we scroll through and scroll through and scroll through.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons that the sooner they get involved with us, the better, because we have a little more time to do that. And then we also monitor as they go forward from the present on.
Okay. So putting your spring break pictures on Facebook, probably not a good idea.
It depends. Anything that, my rule for social media, my boss is on social media and follows me on Twitter. And so I have had the situation myself where I'm like, ooh, should I really put that out there? My mom is a friend of mine on Facebook. If there's anything that I don't want my mother to see, I probably don't want the rest of the world to see it. And the thing that we caution clients about social media is when people say, oh, well, my stuff is protected, or, oh, my stuff only my friends can see. That's generally okay for, just Joe Schmo.
Until they're not your friend anymore.
Until they're not your friend anymore,
Right.
or until somebody actually goes digging, finds one of your friends, gets access that way.
Okay.
It's best to assume that anything you put out on social media is available for the world to see.
Now, in the good old days, Shannon.
In the good old days, this was much easier. Yes.
They used to say, well, if you don't want it on the front page of the New York Times,
Yes.
Don't write it down, or don't email it, for example.
Absolutely.
Same rule applies today.
Same rule should apply. Absolutely.
Sure. Okay. And with so many, everyone's a photographer, everyone's
Yes.
a camera person now with smartphones. So be very careful what
Right.
you put out there.
Right.
Okay.
Not allowing other people to tag you in things also helps.
Okay.
That's a little tip.
All right, interesting. What are some other stumbling blocks to running for office that, other than social media, that people run into when they think, I have some financial issues in my background, or I know that just came up in state government, for example.
It did. When I meet with prospective clients, I generally mention to them, let me back up. Most people generally think that they have something in their background that really disqualifies them from running for office. They went through a nasty divorce, or they have debt, or they have a lot of student loans, or they flunked a class when they were a student, something like that. Those are generally not things that are an issue. People who have had substance abuse problems in the past, that's not necessarily a disqualifier. There are only a few really bad things that I would say are complete disqualifiers. So most people, they think it's worse than it really is. But the trick is to not make it worse for yourself. So one of the examples I always give is, making sure that your property taxes are paid.
Okay.
And people laugh when I say that, but Kurt Dowd, our speaker, found out on the first day of session that if you don't pay your property taxes, and in his case, it was something minor. It was under $100. I don't know what the backstory is of that, but and it is paid.
All right.
But he found out that can be a story all over NPR, all over the rest of the media outlets on the very first day of session.
Kind of a distraction.
Very much a distraction.
Right.
I believe, I haven't talked to him personally about it, but I believe he felt very attacked. I believe his party felt very attacked. And I think that's one of the reasons that that first day of session got off to a more negative start than normal.
Probably right. Yeah. I would think.
That's my guess.
And that also involves his family and his,
Absolutely.
personal life. Right.
Yeah. His statement was I thought was fantastic. He talked about how the recession has hurt a lot of people. He himself lost a job, and so when you have debt and no job to fall back on, he is primarily a legislator. That's the only job he has right now.
Sure.
And that job doesn't pay a whole lot. That just puts him in the same category as other Minnesotans who are having financial difficulties.
Right.
And I thought that was a really good point for him to make. Definitely.
I think that's a good, not an excuse, but I think it's definitely something that people can relate to.
Absolutely.
Especially after the recession and all of that happened. So, do you have any just interesting tips for people that are looking at running for office in a few years down the road? That
I would say getting started the sooner is better. Some people come in and they want to run for office, particularly if it's a partisan office where they would need an endorsement from one of the parties. Being a known entity to the party, either volunteering for other candidates or being involved at your precinct level, that's very helpful. Being known within your community as yourself before you're known as a candidate is also helpful, because when the first thing that people have heard of you is that you are asking for their vote.
Who's that person?
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. That puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage. So the earlier the start, the better. A lot of people don't want to declare that they're running for office before they're really actually declared and filed and all of that, and that's perfectly acceptable.
Right.
But yeah, getting started sooner is always better.
Do people understand, and I know just at the local level and the state level, and we're leaving Congress aside and obviously the presidency, how much money it takes just to run for office with? Do you advise people on that as far as?
A little bit.
Yeah.
One barrier can also be that a lot of people are very uncomfortable asking for money or talking about money. So getting as much help in fundraising as possible is good. And again, that's starting earlier.
Right.
Depending on what race you're in, it can be very expensive or not.
Sure. Some
little city
signs
council races,
right.
Yeah, you can do that for a couple $1,000s. A state senate race, I believe they're capped at $86,000 for the public subsidy. That's the spending limit.
Okay.
Is $86,000, which is still a lot of money.
Right.
In a lot of cases.
Right. Okay.
And then Congress, of course, you're talking millions of dollars, and and presidency hundreds of million.
Sure. I think we said on a previous show that both Romney and Obama respectively spent $1 billion last time. And of course, Romney lost after spending $1 billion. How heartbreaking that must be.
Yeah, it's not a great return on investment for your donors.
Right.
No.
Bain Capital, that probably
Right.
would have been frowned upon. So any advice just, going forward for people if you're looking at, probably a local level, starting at the local level and then graduating up to the state legislature? Is that what people usually do?
Most of the time.
Okay.
Very rarely will somebody run for a very high-profile office right off the bat and be successful.
Okay.
So yeah, starting local and working your way up is generally a good idea. But it all depends on the community. It depends on your standing, and that's all an individual kind of thing. That's why we go through and we make individualized plans for each person based on where they are in life and what race they want to run.
Right. Well, a huge exception to that rule is Donald Trump.
Yes.
Who has never run for political office, to my knowledge, before,
He's not.
and is now running for president.
Right.
Multi-billionaire candidate, kind of a rogue Republican. Would that be a good description for him, do you think?
Yeah, rogue Republican is good.
Populist?
I don't really know how to describe him other than reality TV show star. And the thing that's because in the 80s, had somebody said, how do you know Donald Trump? Most Americans would say real estate. Year and a half ago, most people would have said The Apprentice. What's interesting is what Donald Trump has done is applied the rules to the contestants on his show to the greater presidential election. And what reality TV competitions have taught us is the way to win is to get the most airtime. And the way to get the most airtime is to do outrageous things and say outrageous things and create a lot of controversy. And he is very successfully modeling that behavior in a presidential election.
He's the master of that.
He's absolutely the master of that.
Right. And amazingly, he is the front runner. Now, the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party. What do you think is ultimately going to happen? I know as we tape this in late March that the Republican Party is plotting some way of denying him enough delegates, perhaps a brokered or a contested convention. What's your best guess on this? You follow this type of thing.
I think they're desperately trying to win as many delegates as they can, because taking away what he's already won is not possible. The trick is just some of these guys having to grit their teeth and form alliances that they wouldn't have and didn't have 6 months ago.
Like on Survivor.
Exactly, just like on Survivor. Yes. Again, we're back to reality TV.
Right.
But yeah, if he hits that 50% plus one threshold, then he's got the nomination.
Game over. Right.
Pretty much, yeah.
Do you think that there's a possibility of a Republican out there or a conservative running as a third-party candidate and thereby probably wouldn't ultimately win but would deny Trump the presidency? Is the most likely scenario if a third party came out. Do you think they would risk that?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a really interesting gamble to take. I think establishment Republicans right now are mostly worried about down ticket races. Because that's the thing. If you have Trump as the nominee, and Bernie and Hillary supporters are also struggling with this right now, when some of them say, they won't cross over no matter who the nominee is. If it's not their nominee, then they won't cross over and vote for the other person. So the fear is that those people stay home, and then the down ticket races are affected, because a presidential race has long coattails, and some people who would vote straight down party lines would be missing from that equation.
Like our local congressional race here in the South Metro with Angie Craig and perhaps another radio host as well.
Jason Lewis,
Mr. Lewis. Any thoughts on that race? Is that looking like the two presumptive candidates at this point? Angie Craig obviously is the lone Democratic.
Right. The rest of her opponents dropped out, and she seems to have solidified DFL support behind her one candidacy. Klein's endorsement of a candidate who is not Lewis was very interesting. He did that a couple of weeks ago, I believe. He was obviously not excited about any of the candidates. John Howe, who was the mayor of Red Wing, I think is an interesting person in the mix because he's got some political experience. He's been the mayor, he's been a state senator.
Right.
But his base of support seems to be much smaller than what he would need.
Sure.
The interesting thing about Lewis is that, being in an entertainment position where he's paid to say outlandish things, that comes with a lot of baggage.
Right.
That being said, outrageous things seem to be the theme of this political year, so they may not hurt him quite as badly as they would any other year.
And this is the year of the outsider.
Yes.
I've heard that on TV a lot recently here, where, possibly, I know Senator Lindsey Graham, who was himself a candidate for president, was saying earlier here that, he believes Governor John Kasich of Ohio would be a better president than Ted Cruz.
Absolutely.
However, he's endorsed Ted Cruz because Cruz has the easiest pathway to...
as far as delegates go,
right.
Yes, absolutely. Cruz is quite a bit ahead of Kasich. Cruz's problem, I think, is going to be in fundraising. I did hear an NPR story on the way when I was over here about the different super PACs forming alliances and getting behind Cruz as candidate, which is good because he's one of the people in the race that doesn't have personal wealth to pull from.
Right, okay. Anything just going on in the political world? We talked about Minnesota, we talked about the presidential race. Maybe we should touch on the Democrats, just to be fair here. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders at taping are still neck and neck in some polls nationally. Hillary, I think, has a large advantage with the superdelegates and with the states that she has won.
Right.
Anything there do you think is going to be a surprise? You think Bernie can last until the convention, or?
I think the trick with Bernie lasting to the convention is going to be if his fundraising numbers stay as high as they have been. He is pulling in an immense amount of money, and they are putting an immense amount of money into the field with paid staff and offices.
More than Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
Right.
He's got a little bit of ground to make up. He's not been in the presidential conversation as long as she has. So establishing him as a candidate is a little harder. I don't know. I've got a good friend working for Bernie, and we'll see.
We'll see what happens. Now, if you could fly back to 1991 to Governor Clinton,
okay,
and look at his background and his reputation at the time, at least, what would you tell Governor Clinton back then in 1991? Ultimately, he went through some scandals. He went through some things. He was on 60 Minutes with his wife and lost the New Hampshire primary, but declared it a victory as the comeback kid with Paul Tsongas winning that. What would you tell Bill Clinton back in 1991?
Stay away from Monica.
Right.
That would be really the only future foretold thing.
Right.
I think Bill Clinton got elected in 93?
92.
92. Assumed office in 93.
Yeah.
I think he got elected in 92 because, he had his flaws, he had his scandals, but that was pre-everybody having internet. It was pre-Facebook, it was pre-Twitter. So his scandals were limited to newspapers and TV and word of mouth, which in that case, the stories traveled far less quickly than they do right now.
Right.
So I think that saved him.
And also it was a three-way race at that point. So didn't win the majority, I think it was 43% or something, but still ousted an incumbent president, which was kind of a feat.
Yep, absolutely. That will show you what kind of advantage personality can be.
Right.
Getting elected in any office is a combination of who you know, what you know, and if people like you. That, are you going to have a beer with him factor?
Right, right.
And he had the have a beer factor in a much higher much higher percentage than George Bush Sr. did.
And then picked Al Gore as the vice president, so we had double Bubba. Remember that?
Yes. Yes.
We had Arkansas and Tennessee represented on the ticket. So
Al Gore was a perfect vice president. He was wonky. He was policy driven. He didn't take up a lot of the spotlight. So yeah, in that situation, that was the perfect partnership.
Sure. Would you have going back? So this is, and we can talk about this if you want. But Al Gore in 2000. What would you have advised? He strayed away from Clinton. He didn't run with Bill Clinton. He said, Bill, just go away. This is my game now. Obviously squeaked out a loss there.
A loss or a win, depending on who you're talking
right.
to.
He got more votes,
yes.
but lost.
Yeah.
What would you have advised him differently? He walked away from the scandal-ridden Clinton years and was his own man.
I think he had to. I think at that point, Bill Clinton's coattails weren't long enough to pull him any genuine support. He had to distance himself from that administration.
We saw what happened.
Yeah. And again, you've got a Bush candidate and a Gore candidate. Who do you want to have the beer with? George Bush.
George Bush.
Absolutely.
Right.
So that was another factor.
Have some pork rinds and go out and cut brush on the Texas prairie and all of that.
On the ranch, yes.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, Shannon, we really appreciate you being on the show today.
Absolutely.
And definitely, we will have some information here at the bottom of the screen about Definitely Someday. Okay. So if you're interested in contacting Shannon and her phone number, we can get that for you. So
Fantastic.
Thanks again, and good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. So here's a thought. It seems like every time you turn on the news lately, someone is saying they're angry. Angry about the economy, angry about the election campaign, angry that Target no longer carries their favorite kind of chips, or just plain angry about the way their life is going. Now, back in the good old days, you'd only hear about teen angst. But now it seems like anger fever is sweeping the nation as fast as a viral video featuring Hillary Clinton barking like a dog. In fact, it's darn right fashionable to be angry. TV commercials and primetime shows glorify characters who have a healthy dose of attitude and talk back to authority figures like parents and police officers. Over on talk radio and the cable news channels, there's no shortage of anger emanating from both sides of the political spectrum, with hosts dedicating much of their airtime to stirring the pot on a variety of issues. You may have noticed that everything is suddenly breaking news, or a scandal ending with Gate or Ghazi. While Republican Donald Trump says he's angry about almost everything happening in America, from immigration to the president's daily activities, Hillary Clinton prefers to use the word fight. She'll fight for American families, fight terrorists around the world, and fight like no one has ever fought before. Now, with all this talk about fighting and anger, it almost sounds like the candidates are in training for a UFC Ultimate Fight cage match rather than a general election campaign. And some of the recent activities at campaign rallies seem to back this up. So it's important to keep a healthy perspective when it comes to all of this anger, and take a step back to assess what's really going on around us. For example, do most people know that the national unemployment rate is under 5%, and the rate in Minnesota is just 3.7%? Likewise, are most people aware that the federal budget deficit is now the smallest it's been since 2008? Not if you believe those who say the country is a disaster, and that the very future of America, democracy, and the Constitution itself is at stake in this election, as if we currently have anarchy. By the same token, journalists also need to do a better job of covering the issues that matter to the American public, rather than letting demagogue candidates drive the narrative by making outlandish statements. Now, being sensational and playing to the lowest common denominator may sell papers and get ratings, but it does a disservice to those who rely on the news to keep them objectively informed. After all, the American political process deserves more respect than a cheesy reality show where someone always gets fired or voted off the island. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Everybody Loves Politics.